In a moment that will touch your heart, a young boy stands face to face with Pope Francis, sharing a personal story that strikes at the core of faith and compassion. But it is what happens next that will make your heart melt, trust me. This encounter will not only move you but also remind you of the power of empathy and understanding. So, let's explore what happened. Teachings on heaven and hell. When people think about heaven and hell, they often imagine two distinct and opposite destinations, one for the righteous, full of light and peace, and the other a dark, fiery pit of eternal sentence. But Pope Francis offers a very different view. He teaches us to focus less on punishment and fear and more on the overwhelming power of God's love and mercy. For Pope Francis, heaven is not a distant, exclusive place reserved for only the perfectly faithful, and hell isn't a fiery dungeon where sinners are doomed forever. Instead, he encourages us to think of the afterlife in terms of relationships, our relationship with God and with love itself. There was one little boy who decided to confront him, and trust me, his reaction will make you emotional, to say the least. The video is going viral, and for a reason. But to truly understand the gravity of the situation, we should first talk a bit more about the Pope and the little boy himself. The thing you should know is that Pope Francis often emphasizes that heaven is the ultimate expression of God's love and mercy, a place where love and forgiveness triumph over all. It's a place where souls who have opened themselves to God's grace, regardless of their flaws and failings, are embraced and healed. Heaven is open to all if we seek forgiveness. The Pope has famously said, reinforcing the idea that God's love is boundless and extends to all who turn toward Him. For the Pope, God's mercy is infinite, and no one is beyond redemption. This belief has become central to his teachings on the afterlife. Heaven, according to Pope Francis, is not merely a reward for moral perfection, it is a place of ultimate reconciliation, where God's mercy and forgiveness can transform even the most broken souls. He teaches that heaven is open to everyone, regardless of their past, provided they seek forgiveness and strive to live in love. In a world filled with judgment and divisions, Pope Francis continually stresses that God's mercy is stronger than human judgment. He often quotes the parable of the prodigal son as an example of how God welcomes back even the most lost of souls with open arms. He also believes that God's mercy is more important than human sin, and heaven is a testament to that mercy. He challenges the idea that heaven is only for the pure or those who have lived flawlessly. Rather, he says that it is for those who, at that final point, turned back to God and asked for forgiveness. On the other hand, Pope Francis speaks about hell in a way that often surprises people. He has been widely misunderstood or misquoted as saying that hell doesn't exist, but what he truly emphasizes is that hell isn't a place of physical torment as it's often depicted in traditional Christian imagery. Instead, Pope Francis describes hell as the spiritual separation from God's love, a state of being that results from turning away from God, from love, and from goodness. Hell, in this sense, is not imposed upon a soul by God as punishment, but rather is chosen by the individual. In one of his homilies, the Pope said, "Hell is being far away from the Lord. It's a place where there's no hope, because you've closed the door to love, but that door is always open as long as you are alive." He insists that people are not thrown into hell by an angry God, but instead choose a path away from God through selfishness and rejection of love. One of the most famous instances where Pope Francis's views on hell sparked attention was during an interview in 2018. It was widely reported that Pope Francis had downplayed the existence of hell, sparking controversy. The Vatican quickly clarified that the Pope was not denying hell but rather emphasizing God's mercy and the hope of salvation for all. In many of his public addresses, Pope Francis speaks of hell as more of a spiritual consequence than a physical one. In a world where people are often judged harshly for their mistakes, Pope Francis's words come as a reminder that God's love surpasses all human understanding. The Pope stresses that God wants to save all souls and that everyone has a chance at grace, regardless of their past. It's not about the rules that we've followed perfectly or the sins we've committed, it's about turning back to God, seeking forgiveness, and allowing His mercy to transform us. His message, time and again, has been that no one is beyond God's love, a message that comes to life in one very special story of a young boy named Emmanuel. Before we get to that, you should know that this boy wasn't the only one who felt the need to speak to the Pope. Stories of compassion and reassurance. Pope Francis has become widely known for his deep empathy, compassion, and personal approach to those in distress. He is not a distant figure of authority but a shepherd who reaches out directly to the people, offering comfort and reassurance in their moments of deepest sorrow and doubt. His actions reflect a profound commitment to helping others understand God's mercy, particularly when they are wrestling with questions about the fate of their loved ones or their own salvation. In numerous instances, Pope Francis has reached out personally to individuals in their time of need, demonstrating his belief that the Church must meet people where they are, especially in their pain. One of the ways he does this is through his famous phone calls, direct, personal interactions with people facing overwhelming struggles. These phone calls are often spontaneous and unexpected but have left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who receive them. One story involved a mother grieving the sudden loss of her son. She was left devastated by his death, but knew God could welcome him into heaven. Pope Francis, learning of her distress, decided to call her personally. This simple but profound gesture spoke volumes about his character. He wasn't just a distant leader issuing proclamations, he was a pastor, a man willing to take the time to offer personal comfort. When he spoke to the grieving mother, he listened to her pain. She poured her heart out, telling the Pope how much she missed her son and how she wanted to pay decent respect. They decided to pay tribute to him in the local church, where he was a regular visitor, too. The mother knew her son was in a better place now, and after hearing so many great words about him, she finally came to peace with his passing. She realized it was all part of God's plan. This story, like many others, reflects Pope Francis's unwavering belief in the power of mercy. Another moving example of Pope Francis's compassion happened when he met a widow during one of his general audiences. The woman had been struggling with the loss of her husband, a man who, like many, was far from perfect. She loved him dearly but worried about his salvation. In the years since his passing, she had been haunted by doubts about whether he had found peace with God. During the encounter, she shared her fears with the Pope. She expressed her uncertainty not just about her husband's spiritual standing but also about her own faith. How could she be at peace when she didn't know if her husband was with God? It was a question that had tormented her for years. He explained that while we may not always understand how grace works, we can trust that God's love is far greater than we can imagine. He assured the widow that her husband was in God's hands and that she should have faith that God, in His mercy, had welcomed him. This personal interaction was life-changing for the widow. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt a sense of peace. Pope Francis's words, spoken not as a theological argument but as a message of love, gave her the hope and reassurance she had been seeking. She left that meeting with a lighter heart, finally able to trust in God's mercy and let go of the doubt that had burdened her for so long. These stories are just two examples of Pope Francis's tireless efforts to reach out to those in pain, offering them reassurance in their moments of doubt. Whether it's through a phone call, a meeting during a public audience, or a letter, the Pope makes it clear that he believes in a church that walks alongside people, especially in their suffering. For him, there is no situation too difficult, no question too painful for God's mercy to enter. The Pope has also extended his compassion to those questioning their own worthiness of God's love. On more than one occasion, people have expressed doubts about their own salvation, fearing that they have strayed too far from the church or committed too many sins to be forgiven. In these moments, Pope Francis always returns to the same message: God's love is unconditional. He reminds them that there is no sin too great, no mistake too irreversible, that God's forgiveness cannot cover. These moments of reassurance are significant because they reflect Pope Francis's broader view of God's love and the afterlife. For him, the afterlife is not about rigid rules or strict judgments, it's about the boundless love of a father who desires all of his children to return to him. This attitude of mercy will play a crucial role in the story of a little boy named Emmanuel, who once faced a question of his own regarding the fate of his beloved father.